someone mentioned that the House of Assembly, the restoration of the House of Assembly, should have been probably one of the first, bits and pieces of the projects, Anguilla program projects. Of course, it has its significance, but we can have a House of Assembly here sitting in the studio, so to speak. I personally believe that, with health and education, I may have my bias towards health, but the reality is, and the fact is that we only have 124 facility on island, and rightfully so, that was addressed initially and first. We'll talk about that next week. You'll give me a little time so that I really and truly can go into health and talk about that and how that came about.
Right, but I remember the discussion, the remark made by the governor, and of course we have to thank the governor's office, the UK citizens, for the £60 million that we would have received after Hurricane Irma. And one of the things that we grappled with just after Hurricane Irma was when we went around and looked at the damage. One of the things that the governor did say is that if there's anything that should withstand a storm, it should be the hospital. And so that was why the hospital was one of the primary points, one of the first projects that had to get off the ground in terms of repair, immediate repair. And the second were the schools, because school had just started on September 7th, during that period of time, and we needed to get our children back in, or else we would have been concerned about the delay that the children would have been out of school and not being able to receive their education. And so those two, I believe that as a government, the Anguilla United Front government, we took a decision to place those two aspects as priority for repair and restoration.
And while you're on that, talking about prioritizing the projects after the hurricane, we must also emphasize that at the end of the day, through stellar leadership, through a vision, and emphasize the Anguilla United Front administration at the end of the day, led by the Honorable Victor Banks,
the A10 Mini, the A10
to the British government, and I know that you were a member of that negotiating team that went off to the UK. And I just want our listeners and our viewers to understand this. I have to re-emphasize it, because you would hear a lot of talk out there, some of it rightfully so, in the sense that we have to be thankful for the assistance, the British taxpayers, the significant work that the governor's office would have done here over the time, the governor himself and Steve and the entire team. But we have to emphasize that the £60 million that were allocated to us, it just didn't appear. And as leaders, and you would have been part of that delegation to the UK, you had to make the case, so to speak. So you would hear some of the folks, the detractors, saying, because of Hurricane Irma, and we're going to get to that. If it wasn't for Hurricane Irma, this wouldn't happen, that wouldn't happen, and all sorts of things, and so on and so forth. But I want to point out here that it is because of the representation that Anguilla, through the Anguilla United Front, would have had at that particular point in time, negotiating with the British government, is one of the reasons why we were able to get that £60 million.
Yes.
I can very well remember a lot of pundits were talking about you all going to the United Kingdom, a waste of time, and so on and so forth.
Right.
And nothing would come back. And then when we were granted that $60 million, they were saying it is not enough, and all sorts of things, and so on and so forth. I wanted to shed a little light, because you were part of that delegation that went to the UK in terms of making the case to the British government so that we would have been able to have those sort of funds.
Yeah, that is correct. And I want to say that the handing over of the House of Assembly represents one of the first sets of handing over that's going to be taking place over the next couple of weeks. I know that the Aurelia Kelly Primary School is all but completed, the new classroom block. The South Hill Clinic is ready for handover again, probably by the end of this month, if not the beginning of next month.
The extension to the lab?
The extension to the lab, yeah. So we have a lot of projects that were started from those from the Anguilla program funds that are about to come to fruition. But it is disappointing, yes, because when you attend the handover, it's almost as if there's an attempt to minimize the hard work that was done by the previous government, the Anguilla United Front. And the reality is that, as you said, the money did not fall from the sky. I specifically recall Mr. Banks had 3 key points when he traveled to the UK to explain to I believe actually it was 5 points that he explained to the British government the reason why we were in need of those funds. And he was very strong in making his representations, both before he went to the UK and while he was there. And I can recall it being at the delegation, being part of the delegation when we got to the UK. The Monday morning, the Prime Minister at the time would have sent a notice wanting all of the heads of government to attend a meeting at 8 o'clock before the general sessions began. And Mr. Banks attended, and when he came back, he reported that of all of the British overseas territories, Anguilla had received by far the bulk of the funds, which was £60 million for Anguilla, for the rebuilding and reconstruction of the infrastructure here in Anguilla. And that was significant because we knew the condition that we were in. We also knew the state of the economy that had been in such a situation, in such a state for some time. Now, it didn't just show up in 2017. It was there for quite a period of time. And so we knew that we would not be able to rebuild unless we received assistance from the UK. And they stepped forward and they stepped up and they were able to provide. Now, of course, it is always never enough, because there's so many other things that we can do. We can, if we had additional funds, the paving of, or the reconstruction of the valley roads, the extension to the airport, and all of these structures. But £60 million is not something to sneeze at. And so we want to, again, put on record our thanks to the UK, but also we want to put on record our thanks to the leadership, Mr. Banks, and Blondell Clough, who was our representative in the UK, who would have made those forceful representations. Because the other thing is that you're not just given money. You have to identify the projects from beforehand, and there was a lot of work that was done behind the scenes to identify it. So I can talk about education. We went through and looked at all the schools. The Albina Lake Hodge Comprehensive School. We looked at the Morris Vanderpool School. We looked at all the schools and we assessed what was the extent of the damage. What could our children go back into? What rooms and what rooms they could not go back into for the health and safety of the students and the teachers, etc. And from that, we made a determination as to which projects had to be redeveloped, what buildings had to be demolished. And that wasn't just done by jumping up and saying we're going to knock down this building and knock down that building. It was done based on an assessment, engineering perspective, and a determination as to the health and safety of our people. And so, yes, there was a lot of work. We cannot, no matter what, it cannot be taken away that from the fact that the Anguilla United Front did secure these funds. There was work involved. The projects had to be identified, a value placed on those projects for the funds to be able to come forward and to be distributed. And so today we're beginning to reap the efforts, reap the rewards, and see the hard effort of the previous government coming to fruition. And I don't think that there's anyone that they can seek to try to deny, to undermine, to minimize the value. But at the end of the day, you can see for yourself the structures that are coming on stream.
Definitely, leaders. And I mentioned earlier that the work that you're doing as leader of the opposition, and you put out a report card, so to speak, on the AUM first 100 days, and just to piggyback on that a little, in terms of representations, in terms of presenting and convincing the British government, so to speak, when assistance is needed, because it's not just a one-size-fits-all, and at the end of the day, the government of the day must make the case.
Yes.
Yes, we're in a global pandemic. Yes, I mean, there are economic tough times for us, borders closed and so on and so forth. But I just want to put it out there that this administration, like the previous administration, must be able to make the case to the British government in order for assistance. And in your report card, and I can quote from it, it says here, in recent times, the Premier also explained that he has already started discussions with the UK for additional funding in 2021, as the existing funds secured by the previous administration are anticipated to end by December 31st, 2020. Right. So again, this administration and the leadership must be able to make the case to the British government if they're going back, and they will have to go back for additional funding and so on and so forth, despite the campaign rhetoric. Mm-hmm. The reality sets in when you get in office. And,
right.
We can talk about so many things, even the budgetary support of the $100 million that they were not supposed to accept. They were going to, those sort of things. But I just want our viewers and our listeners to realize that outside of the political sphere, this is reality, that the present administration will have to go back and negotiate with the British government in terms of additional funding for the 2021 budget. So they will have to make the case. And don't expect that the British government and the British taxpayers are going to say, well, Anguilla is suffering from severe economic hardships, and as a result of that, here is a handout, because right. They themselves.
So they're suffering.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I just want to make that point that leadership, and your whole government and leaders must be able to make the case and present the case in a really stark fashion in order for us to be able to receive those sort of things, because nobody is going to just hand out stuff like that, and those pitiful days are over as a result of this. This is not a Hurricane Irma that sort of damaged us, and the UK was cleared.
Right.
There wasn't any Hurricane Irma in the UK, so to speak, but COVID-19 is all over. So
all over. And you made mention of the 100-day report card, and yes, the 100 days was on I think on the 10th of October, which would have been last week Saturday, or the week before Saturday. And so, it was an opportune time to be able to sit down and take stock as to where we are as a country, because it's some 3 months after the general elections. It is time. It is an appropriate time to look and see how many of the promises, what promises were made, what is the outcome of any one promise that would have been given. And so the report card was really just highlighting a number of things that were said either before the election and leading into the general elections, and what was done after. Because I think it's important that we highlight the facts to the people of Anguilla, and that's the reason why we're here today, to talk just the facts. And so the facts are, we all know that before the general election, there was a lot of criticism about the $100 million from the $100 million dollars from the UK
budgetary support.
For the budgetary support, and I suppose that when you pick up a document, you can read whatever you want to out of it and pull out all of the alarming things that you think are there, etc. But at the end of the day, the point is that the Anguilla United Front government recognized that with the borders closed since March, and remember, prior to the closure of the border, we were anticipating that this year would have been one of the best years in terms of tourism dollars and tourism numbers coming into to Anguilla. And with COVID, we had to go into a shutdown, so we had to place health over finances. But of course, that came with a cost. And so I remember the premiers criticizing the fact that Mr. Banks had signed the MOU, and he was saying that he should have waited. The existing premier, Dr. Webster, would have criticized Mr. Banks and said that it was done after the House was dissolved, or around that time it was close to general elections, and he should have waited until after. But afterwards, when Dr. Webster, the Honorable Premier, would have made a presentation on radio, he explained that come the end of July, there would have been a difficulty with financing in the country. And so that money was needed immediately for budgetary support. And when you look at the fact that he is now indicating that it is October now, and he's negotiating already for January, it tells you that you can't just wake up one day and make a presentation, a proposal, request for funding to fill a budgetary gap for the next day. You have to do it in sufficient time because there's negotiations involved, there are discussions that have to take place, there's a back and forth before you actually reach to the point where you have to sign off.
And their terms and conditions.
And their terms and conditions. And
That's
you
right.
have the ability to negotiate that before the time comes when it's necessary. So you won't have waited. I don't know if we had not signed it before, you have heard the criticism. The previous government knew that come the end of July there would be no money in the budget, and yet still they sat there and they allowed the country to run down because they knew that they were going to lose, and so they wanted us to be in a bind. So I mean, you can't win either way, but at the end of the day, the point is that you had to secure a responsible government, had to secure those funds in advance so that when the time came for the budgetary support, you had the monies there that were able to kick in.
And those discussions were apolitical. I mean, it's a reality. Whoever.
Yeah, right. But I mean, at that point in time, when you're in a country and when you're talking about filling a budgetary gap caused by a pandemic, the last thing that you're thinking about is elections and the polls, because you have to deal with the here and now, and that is what we had to do at that point in time.
But exactly.
Yeah.
Because of the electorate right. Decide, well, we'll change the administration and give the APM an opportunity, and as a result of that, some of the what I would call the ripple effect of what we would have done, they were able to step in and continue despite the rhetoric that they had.
And now, obviously, they are going to engage in another round of discussions for budgetary support. And so what really was the difference between what was done during our term to assist the country and to make sure that we continue the job and what is being done now? It's the same thing. It's the same thing.
I put it down as just a lack of experience, and no fault of theirs, but at least they're in office now, and I would hope that they would understand how government operates, and irrespective of the political dynamics of the day, you still have a country to run.
Yeah, I think it's an eye-opener. I mean, not just the 100 million situation, but just the dealing with the running of a country as a whole. There's so many things that you want to do. There's so many things that I wanted to do, and I'm sure you want to do. But at the end of the day, if it comes down to the priorities that you have to put in place based on the limited funds that you have, you can't do everything.
Juggling act.
Right. And so I believe that is why during the campaign, we were very responsible with our campaign. We weren't making promises that we knew we could not keep, because we understood that there were difficult times. And you notice that none of us were dancing on stage. I don't think any of us danced. Did you? Did you dance? I wasn't dancing.
I have two left
You shook a Lego. Well, and what it said to me is that we understood the difficulties and the challenging times that we were going to be facing. And so, and that's where we are now.
There's so much more to discuss on that, Cora, but we'll just move on a little. The other function that took place last week, I think it was last week, Thursday, the former Chief Minister, the Honorable Hubert Hughes, would have celebrated his 87th birthday. There were two functions, naming of the road, and then there was a church service that was held.
Very, very nicely done.
Right.
Excellent job.
And
by the organizers. I was there, and I spoke. I was there at the naming ceremony. Mr. Hughes, the Honorable former Chief Minister, was in fine shape. He looked really good, and so it was good to see him celebrating his 87th birthday with his wife, Mrs. Norma Hughes. And we left from the naming of the road, and we went down to the South Hill ball field, and they had a nice function. It was, the tents were set up very nicely, and it rained quite a bit, but we call it showers of blessings.
Yes.
And all weekend I think we've been getting showers of blessings as well. And I spoke. I gave a few remarks, and that is because I was invited to do so, and I appreciate the invitation by the organizers for the leader of the opposition to speak at his birthday celebration. And so I wanted to just highlight my positive experience with Mr. Hughes in terms of him calling and asking for assistance, not for himself, but for people, even though he was retired, etc. And it struck me the care and concern that he has and continues to have for his people.
Right.
And so, but I know he made a statement afterwards.
Yeah, I was about to say. I was about to say that despite our political differences, we are on different sides of the political divide, so to speak. But personally, and it's no secret, that both Hewitt, myself, and Nama, we go back a long way. So while there's a division from a political aspect, and I have no doubt that at some point in time, maybe, Hubert, I shouldn't say at some point in time, Hubert meant well for Anguilla. He probably, had his way, his own unique style and approach and expressing and so on and so forth. At the end of the day, I believe, and I stand to be corrected, that those who are elected would have Anguilla's best interests at heart. It's just the method or the route that is used in order to express the best interest. And you said yes, he made mention of a statement that there should not be any elections anytime soon. There's no need for elections because the government and the opposition is working together. There's no opposition and so on and so forth. Yeah. And that's him with his rhetoric. But what I would say, and you can comment on this too, that thus far, the items on the agenda for the House of Assembly that we would have dealt with since the last election, really and truly, to my mind, wasn't anything controversial as I could see it, where you would have a stark difference of opinion and approach, to what is happening. Talk about the overdraft facility. That is a
why would you object to the overdraft facility? A renewal of the overdraft facility?
Anything that came to the House thus far.
Right.
So just to let the viewers and the listeners know that there is an opposition, and a very, very active opposition. I don't think in the history of Anguilla we would have had an opposition of this magnitude and depth of experience, so to speak. But when they, and as I mentioned last week and continue to mention, in the House of Assembly, when there are items and bills and things that are beneficial to the overall development of Anguilla, there will be no opposition. Right. But when there are controversial issues, you will hear from this opposition. Yeah, and it's nothing new to me. I'm sure it's a new experience for you.
Well, this is my first time in opposition, but I think that any opposition has to be balanced with fairness and reasonableness.
Opposing for opposing's sake.
You just don't get up and oppose because you're supposed to be opposition. It makes no sense, and you lose the trust of the people. Right. At the end of the day, if it is that you bring something to the House that is needed. For instance, the Attorney General's chambers have brought 4 bills to the House, and that dealt with the COVID situation and allowing access by video, etc., for the courts and all those other things. And those were needed to be able to change the legislation so that the courts have a greater ability to hear people and allow access to the court. So why would we object to something like that? Just for the sake of objecting to make it appear as if we're doing something? No. I think that opposition has to be reserved for very real and serious issues and concerns. And if it is that there is a concern with a particular bill, even though you agree with it in concept, in principle, if there's something in it that's not good, then we reserve the right to get up and speak on it and ask questions and probe it a little bit. And I think that that's our job. And so I think it's very premature. Someone mentioned to me afterwards, yes, so Mr. Hughes said that there's no opposition. I said, yeah, well, that's wishful thinking. But at the end of the day, we do have a job to do and a role to play. We have to represent the people. We have to bring issues to the forefront. And if it is that there are concerns that have to be raised, they will be raised.
And we will support the government when they are doing what is required in order to alleviate some of the hardships that our people are experiencing.
But there are other things that we don't agree with. They haven't come to the House of Assembly as yet. But the things that have come, are not.
You spoke about that, because I'm going back now to the script of your report, and just to to read another paragraph there. It said, in recent times, and I quote, "We have heard that this APM administration intends to do away with the health authority and bring it back under government, do away with the Anguilla Development Board, bring it back under government, and do away with the Anguilla Community College. All of these are significant institutions that were created for very specific reasons. We expect very live debate and discussions to take place on these issues."
Yeah.
So here again, as we mentioned earlier, these things that you outlined here in your report, for instance, to do away with the health authority and bring it back under government.
What are your views on that?
Absolutely would be a retrograde step, would be a backward step.
Why do you say that?
Because to take the health authority and bring it back under the Ministry of Health, right? To me, is a misunderstanding of why it was created in the first place. We can talk about that at length with respect to taking it back. Now, is the health authority what it's supposed to be, what it was meant to be, and so on and so forth? Not as yet.
Right.
It's in the right direction. There are tweaks that need to be made. The health authorities, the legislation for the health authority needs to be looked at. There's no doubt about that at all. It needs to be looked at. It needs to have more oversight. But to bring it back under the ministry, it would be a catastrophe, I should say.
Do you think these steps are really because, in terms of wanting to make your own mark, a government making their mark, and that's why these type of decisions? Do you think that there's some pressure that's being borne to look at? No.
That may be a red, with respect to bringing the health authority back under the ministry, that may be a red mark. Because I really and truly would not be supporting something like that, and because you would have to repeal the Health Authority Act,
right.
And of course we're going to talk about it next week as well.
We'll focus on health next week.
Yeah, as part and parcel of that entire thing. There's so many things that need to be sorted out. As I mentioned, the act. The act needs again to be revisited.
Right.
There need to be some amendments and so on and so forth going forward. But to take it back under the
I agree with you. I mean,
it was the Ministry of Health. That was an employee,
and the hospital was under
absolutely
right,
and the government of Anguilla.
Right.
So
okay.
And I'm sure that as the Premier and the now Minister of Health, find his way around and what I should say, get his footing in place. I'm sure a lot of those things that he will revisit, similar to the budgetary support, similar to the GST, similar to some of the discussions that are taking place now in terms of the Sanagron, the Marine and the Sanagron Salt. But there are things that we'll have to revisit, and I am sure that when the facts are laid out for him, he and his administration, I'm sure that they will rethink some of these things.
Yeah, and the ADB board.
The ADB board needs to be strengthened.
I think before elections, I can't remember if it was this year or late last year, we took a supplementary budget to give additional funding for the Anguilla Development Board because they play such a critical role. In fact,
absolutely.
I feel that we should be giving the development board so much more money to be able to do the work that they're doing. I mean, when you talk about children going off to university, it's the ADB that parents go to, to be able to provide funding, etc. And I think that again, bringing it back into government is a step backward.
And the community college.
Right? And the doing away with the community college or merging it with UE. I mean, no. The University of the West Indies, we have an open campus here, and they provide certain things, certain skills, etc., certain programs. And the community college has their own set of programs that they provide as well. One of the things that we wanted to ensure that we deal with would have been those people that may have left school without all their subjects, without all of the skills, or maybe even working in the hotel industry and other industries and want to have certificates under their belt, etc., to be able to advance themselves. And the community college plays that particular role. I mean, yes, you have the North Hill Center as well, but they have a particular role to play as well. So, to me, why would you? And we talk about how educated we are and how how much we're learned, etc. But the Anguilla Community College was created to bring education to everyone that had the ability, the interest, and willingness to do so in Anguilla. If you're an Anguillan, do you know that you are offered a reduced rate at the community college? And so these are the kind of things that you want to highlight. So instead of shutting something down or merging it, etc., at this point in time, why don't we build it up? Yeah. Why don't we put in the resources, make sure that they can stand on their own? Because I think that's the big concern. The fact that they are taking, that they have funds that come from the government, and they may not be making a profit, but maybe it means that we have to revisit.
And let me put this out there, right? I mean, some of the pundits out there think that in an administration, that the leader is the one who dominates and so on and so forth, and that we don't have differences of opinion, right? Victor would have gotten his fair share of that as if though he's some dictator and so on and so forth, and those of us who work with him know a little different. Here is a situation now, and as former Minister of Education, I was instrumental, right, in the view and putting forward the notion, along with Sir Hilary Beckles, the Vice Chancellor of the West Indies, of the University of the West Indies, where they had created what they call University of the West Indies colleges, or something like that. Now,
yes.
I was a staunch supporter of it, and here is the reason why. Because of our size, the population, students' population, and so on and so forth, I saw it as a way in order to be able to merge, let's say, the community college and the university open campus. The mere fact that we don't need these two institutions to be competing for students.
That's right.
And we don't need them to duplicate courses. So, and as you mentioned, it would have been a unique opportunity whereby from the colleges, the community colleges aspect of it, we can focus more on the technical areas. Technical areas.
Yes.
From the university side of it, where we can, some of the folks who are deficient and entry requirements and so on and so forth can be worked on in order to be able to do that.
So it's a collaboration.
It's a collaboration.
Not necessarily just
not
subsumed into UE and disappear completely.
No. It would have been an integral part of it, a collaboration.
Yeah.
But it makes sense.
Yeah, but
because the University of the West Indies and the Anguilla Community College don't need to be competing for students and so on.
Yeah.
They need to be together. What this institution is offering, the next one doesn't need to duplicate it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's a stepping stone.
It's a stepping stone.
So it's a work. So you take, so that every Anguillan, every person living in Anguilla has the opportunity to move from a place where they may not have enough subjects, they may not have reading, math, whatever it's subject they need, to be able to get ultimately a degree. Remember, we celebrated our first PhD student, right? Homegrown here in Anguilla.
That's right.
And so that is the extent at where we want to go, from having no subjects or little subjects to being able to attain a PhD right here in Anguilla. That's where we want to go. And so my concern is having new faces. Yes, you come with new ideas, etc., but you lack the background knowledge and understanding as to why things have been created and the direction that things that other persons may see things going. And so I would hope that there's a lot of discussion that takes place on the Health Authority, the Development Board. I understand that there were discussions that took place with the Development Board and leadership so that they could have a better understanding as to what the importance of the Development Board and what they do for Anguilla. But it is important looking at, and that's the challenge that this government has, is how do you look at the statutory bodies?
And they must be looked at.
And how do you look at all of these organizations that may be seen to be a drain on the government's purse, right? You have to balance the interest, what they're there to do, why they're not doing it, and then look at the way in which they can become profitable. Because ideally, each of them should be able to stand on their own feet and to be profitable. But what is it that they need, and do we just decide to do away with them and go backward? Because remember, the things that are being proposed, we were there before.
Right.
And so you want to advance. You don't want to move back into a situation where you'd left that didn't work for the people.
That's the danger, and I should say the hypocrisy of getting out there, talking about education and preparing your people,
Right.
and still want to do away with the institutions that actually is set up to do that.
Right.
So I am sure that the better judgment in terms of the premier and his government would look at these things in totality, in its entirety, and not just, as you mentioned, looking at it strictly from an economic standpoint, where here is the Anguilla Community College. It is a drain. It is a hemorrhage, so to speak, of the funding of the government. So let's shut that down, close that off, without looking at the ramifications and how it needs to be improved.
Right. Yeah.
So those are the sort of things that.
Now I must say that we haven't seen anything in writing. The exco minutes don't really talk about the steps, necessarily. Of what the intent is with the statutory bodies. We know that they've been looking at them. We know that the cost that they've identified, what the cost is to the government. But I would like to see some real progressive ideas coming forward that helps to build up these institutions as opposed to destroying them and doing away with them.
And they must make the case. I mean, of course, if they're going to the British government talking about budgetary support and assistance for 2021, they must be able to justify, so to speak, and to make a case to the British government how important these things are for overall development and our future development going forward.
Right.
So
but the Caribbean Development Bank supports the ADB. They support the community college as well, and so when you look at these international organizations as well that support these institutions, there has to be some value to them, don't you think?
Yes, it's quite a bit of value.
So we'll talk about it some more.
Yeah, you'll have to talk about it some more. Last week when we were here, we started initially, talking about labor code and so on, and you were not aware.
you always start to talk about labor when we're coming out towards the end of the hour, but go ahead, because there's so much to talk about.
We have to spend an entire hour just talking about labor and labor issues and so on and so forth. So many other topics to discuss. You mentioned that you didn't see anything in writing with respect to the development board and so on, but I know for sure that I heard with my own 2 ears from the premier on the campaign trail that he had intended to do away with the health authority and bring it back under the ministry. That was one of his platform planks, so to speak. So that's the reason why I said a little earlier, I would hope that his weight of judgment after getting in office and realizing what's happening, that in itself, that doesn't take place, but is strengthened and tweak the act and so on and so forth in order to be able to move forward. And of course, we are going to hold them to the fire, hold their feet to the fire, going forward and as we move. You mentioned in terms of the labor, we may have to do next week on labor, because there are so many of unemployed Anguillians who would have been affected by the closure of the hotels and so on and so forth. That I really think that
and there's a connection. Not to cut you off, because I do know people that have said that they're very frustrated with the fact that almost, every couple of years they lose their job, they're terminated. So they're actually taking classes at the community college to improve their skills, to give them a more broad base, education, etc., so that they can branch out into other areas.
Right.
And so that again underscores the importance and how the community college impacts our Anguillians and gives them the ability to be able to succeed.
And seeing that you were a former Minister of Labor and were intimately involved in the legislation and so on and so forth, I think our listeners and our viewers really and truly need to get your opinion, being a legal luminary, to get your opinion about it and how we could go about it, what your thoughts were in terms of moving forward. Let's say had AUF administration continued, where you would have been, what direction you'd have been taking that the labor law into.
Yeah.
So,
we have 5 minutes. So I can tell you very quickly in 5 minutes, but we'll definitely have to come back again.
Yes.
Now, I have to say that there are many employers during this difficult period that have been trying to work with employees. I know many that would have given, as opposed to terminating, have given alternate work hours. So one week a set work, another week another set work, etc. We have those that have continued to pay, if not full salary, then certain amount of compensation to allow the employees to continue to have some kind of income during the period of time. And then there are others that, as opposed to outright terminations, they've chosen to continue to keep the staff laid off, so that at some point when the hotels reopen, as opposed to having to go back to the market and having to rehire, interview, and hire new people and train those persons, they already have their people. And it works well as well, because those people that are laid off know that at some point they have a job to come back to. And so I want to recognize and appreciate those employers that are really trying hard. And then you have employers like Blanchard's Restaurant that go beyond the pale. I mean, in terms of assisting and bringing in goods for persons to be able to support. And I need to find out what their numbers are looking like, because I know that they are assisting a significant amount of people across Anguilla, and so they're doing a lot of work. And so there are those employers that we value and we recognize, because not everyone is bad, and but there are those other employers that probably a little wanting in terms of their approach and stuff. And I remember after Hurricane Irma, I had a conversation, and because terminations, what it does, when you outrightly terminate staff, when you have a situation like Hurricane Irma or even COVID, etc., and then you have to turn around and bring back the same staff, it creates a lack of loyalty. So, for instance, you may have a hotel where even after Hurricane Irma, as soon as the hotel started hiring, people were leaving from the hotels where they were at and going to this other hotel. Why? Because they recognized, they treated the staff well, they didn't terminate them, and the response from the staff themselves were good, the packages and stuff that they were given. And when you have those hotels that did outright termination, those entities that did outright terminations, you had a backlash, because the staff that came back, but they had no loyalty. So as soon as something better came around in their mind, the morale is low, and you want to have loyal staff that will stick with you through thick and thin. And when you have loyal staff during the hurricane, after hurricane, no matter what it is, you call them to come in. They will come in, they will help clean up their, maybe you compensate them for it, etc. But the fact is that they love where they're working, and because they love where they're working, they're willing to put in the extra effort, and the employer recognizes that. And so for those persons that were terminated, and in a situation where, for instance, you are on 1-year contracts, and I have to come back to it again, because it is a sore point for many persons in that industry who are on 1-year contracts and don't understand what their rights are, what the obligations are for the employer. Now, there are a number of hotels as well that, even though they terminated staff, they gave them good packages take-home package, which was better than what the labor code provides, the labor law.
Okay.
And so those staff, disappointed, yes, that they were sent home, but still appreciative of the fact that the hotel has recognized their hard work and effort over the years. And so even though they have to be terminated, they receive some kind of compensation that they are comfortable with.
Okay.
And then you have, and so for those where the terminations take place, we had under our labor, I think we're given until 115. We were given they were, if they were made permanent. So the new Labor Relations Act would have provided that if you were on a 1-year contract, when the law kicked in, at the following signing of a new 1-year contract, you became a permanent employee. And we wanted to do that because our old law did not have any reference to permanent employees, but it was always understood. Mm-hmm. So how we operated in Anguilla was just by you're working at the hotel, you go home for the 3 months, you come back, but you have a permanent job, that you can go to the bank and get, financial assistance and stuff like that.
I remember the folks in the employees of Captain Luca. They were referred to as Jalukans or something.
Yes, that was the pride that they had in working at Capjalupa because of the way in which they were treated and they enjoyed working there. And so we wanted to be able to balance the playing field, right? If it is that you're a good employee, you've worked hard for the year, they recognize your efforts, you're coming back for a new year, why are you not made permanent? Why are you still on another 1-year contract? Why are you on successive 1-year contracts? I mean, it is really demoralizing to know that at the end of a year, or end of a season, even though you've worked so hard and put forward your best effort, that you don't know whether or not you have a job to come back to. And so we wanted to say, okay, well, what, if the previous law did not recognize permanent employees, we want to give Anguillians an opportunity to be in a job that, as long as they do what they're supposed to do, they put in a fair day's work for fair day's pay, they're going to be compensated, and they have a job that they can go back to, unless something happens which requires termination, etc. And then there's steps set out for that. And so you would remember that we were in a back and forth because we had some employers that did not want that. And in fact, some people say, oh, the law was changed to cater to one entity, etc. But the concept of putting people on 1-year contracts has started to seep into other areas in Anguilla. And so you had to deal with the situation all around. And so the law wasn't just, yes, it was created or identified as a result of maybe 1 or 2 entities, but it was put in place to prevent a widespread occurrence of people being on 1-year contracts throughout Anguilla.
Did that 1-year contract began in 2016?
The law it began January 2015. I don't know why you said 2016 because it was 2015, January 2015, before we were elected. We were elected in April of 2015. And I recall the situation coming up at that point in time because I had seen a copy of the contract. They were on short-term, maybe a 3-month contract, the particular person that came to me. And I think I still have a copy of it somewhere. They were on a 3-month contract and they were concerned. They had been working at the entity before, and then they were placed in these short-term contracts because supposedly the entity was selling and all these other things. And so I remember that very clearly. And then they went into 6 months and then a year. And so by the time we were elected, we met with them and we said to them, and I said this, I mentioned this last week, it was not on. It wasn't acceptable. This government was not in favor of all people being on continuous 1-year contracts. And so that's where the tension would have first been created between, and I understand why they wanted to do it as well, to make it easy to get rid of people that wasn't working out. That may be fine for those people that aren't working out, but what about those that are? And you have hundreds of people on 1-year contracts because you're afraid that you may have a bad employee that you can't get rid of. I mean, how fair is that? No. So we changed the law. And we said, okay, after 1 year you become permanent, but then they were put on a new 1-year contract, And that's when the tension arose. And I remember we instructed the Attorney General's chambers to seek clarification through the court as to the relevance and the importance of that, the change in the law that we had made for those one-year contracts. But do you remember that during the campaign, we heard members of this government, the APM government, saying that they were going to change the labor law? And I don't know, they never explained why. They said they would tinker with it, and change some aspects. So I find it interesting that after being elected, as opposed to testing the law that is there to protect Anguillians, they are saying the law has to be changed because it's not good. But it's on the books. It's already been passed through the House of Assembly. It has already been signed by the governor. It has already been assented to. The law was kicked in January of 2019. So you have all these pieces of legislation, or the provisions in the labor law that says that after 1 year you're permanent, and that it kicked in from January of 2019. So in 2020, where we are now, why is it that you're going to the court to say you're going to change the law? You're not even going to test it and say, let us see whether what we have on the books is good law or not. You just decided you're going to change it. What does that mean? What does that say?
There are two things that I want you to repeat, so to speak, before we leave from here. One is that January, the 1 year contract, or the short-term contract, came into being in January 2015, before we assumed office in 2015, April 2015. Because there are some folks out there who think that, the 1 year, you brought a 1 year contract in. So that has to be,
it's amazing.
It has to be said, right? And the other thing is that there are some suggestions out there that the labor law as it stands is more favorable to employees and at the expense of employers and so on.
No, you see what happened is...
You did mention a balance.
Yeah, there's a balance, but what happened is that for people that didn't want the labor law, and you have a number of persons that are very angry, that the law has been put in place, but if you ask them, how does that impact you? What they can say is, okay, well, we had to give 3 days more for holidays, so instead of 12 days, you get 15 days. But everything else, the severance pay, if it is that you are made redundant, why should it not be in our laws? It exists in every other country. St. Kitts has had it for years. Why, if you are sent home, not of your own doing, the hotel closes, etc., or the entity closes, why should you not be recognized for your 20 years of service at that place? So that's what we put into the labor code. And we put in things that we felt we had heard from the people of Anguilla that they wanted to have in it, and in order to make it a modern piece of legislation, we had to include those things. Now, at the same, but the 1 year contracts did not come into being. If it came in with us, and we were okay with it, then why did we even pass legislation to do away with it? It makes no sense. Right. And so I want people to start to work through these things, because you hear a lot of rhetoric and people trying to throw blame on other people, etc. But we put the law in place to stop it.
There are so many issues out there that that I would hear from time to time. And sometimes I've got to ask the folks, I say, do you think that we are that naive, just to sit around and unbelievable, the way how some of the individuals think.
On the study program, we put it in the law as well. They criticize and say, oh, it needs to be tightened up, but it was never there before. So it's very easy for a new government to come in and to criticize what's there. But they were there before as well. Maybe not those bodies, but certainly the entity itself. This might be a 2.0 version, but they were there before, and it was never done then. So I think that, sometimes it may be difficult because we're in opposition to give us our credit for the Anguilla programs, obtaining the 60 million, signing off on the 100 million MOU, all of these advancements that we've made, that they are now following through on today, and not wanting to recognize the Anguilla United Front for what we've done.
But it is part of our responsibility as legislators and as members of the Anguilla United Front and the previous administration. It is incumbent upon us not to allow the present administration or any administration, right, to move away and start to look at the previous administration as a non-factor, so to speak, in what is happening in Angola. And sometimes
change the history.
right.
Right.
So we won't allow that. Definitely not. Okay. We're here. We probably just had just about an hour, and our young folks here, the technical team, these young folks will be able to sort it out for next week, and we will start on time. Of course, when you have both of us here, time
escapes us. Time escapes. Yeah.
So thank you all very much for being here. Thank those who are listening in and those who are viewing via the various media. We will come your way again next week, Monday, God's willing, from 12 noon until 1 o'clock.
Yeah, so thank you very much. Pleasure.